So the Pixar franchise is a very weird franchise for the Pixar catalog because it's not personally, it's not the worst, I would say, of Pixar. Although I guess now it kind of begs the question of what is kind of bad by Pixar standards. Because for a long time, Pixar was like the golden standard of 3D animation, and they pretty much could do no wrong. They were pretty much like Marvel and Star Wars at one point, but now they've fallen off significantly. So what's kind of considered a bad film or a bad franchise now, opposed to what that meant, a decade ago, has kind of changed. But I think even now, Cars is still kind of looked at as maybe not so much the worst of the films and franchises in the Pixar series, but it's definitely not viewed as like one of the best. I mean, at best, it's like looked at as just okay. And I feel like the reason for that, well, I think there's a few reasons, but I think the second Cars film really did a lot of damage to the Cars franchise. Because the one thing I will say, and maybe just because I grew up with the first film, I still think even today, because I rewatched the first film last year, I still think that the first film is a good film. Like I think it's actually a solid, good film. It's a good Pixar film. For me personally, I mean, it might not be in my top like five, but it would be in my top 10. I would say. I mean, everything about the film is good. Like the film looks good visually. It's fucking phenomenal. It still holds up today. Like that film came out well over a decade ago, and I think it's even I don't think it's not been 20 years, but it's been a long time since the first film came out. And even today, you go back and look at that film, it still looks beautiful. The music's good, Rascal Flatts, Life is a Highway. The characters are still fun and memorable. Lightning McQueen, Mater, Doc Hudson, Guido, Luigi. The characters are still iconic. And even Lightning McQueen, even though his films and he's not like as big of a character in the Pixar catalog as like Buzz or Woody, he's up there still. So I think that the first film holds up pretty well, and then the second film is where it just fell apart because I think the problem with the Cars films or the franchise is that it's not really the strongest premise, and a lot of people. One of the things I've noticed is like a lot of people just are hung up about the whole why about like why are they cars? Like why? They're so a lot of people are like just focused or like are caught up in like why are they cars? How they work? Things like that. Which to me is kind of fucking rich, considering I mean Pixar has made films about a talking rat that can somehow control a dude's hair and like make fucking 5-star like perfect cuisines and dishes and shit. There's like a movie about ants. There's like literally their most popular franchise is about toys that just magically come to life somehow. Really, as far as I can tell, there has not been a real explanation as to how and why that is a thing. And I mean, they try to touch on that in the fourth Toy Story film when Forky was brought to life, but they've never really addressed how the fuck that works. They don't really explain why humans can't see them as toys, like living and breathing, or not maybe breathing, but like alive. Like that's not been explained. So like I always thought that was fucking stupid. That like people are like hung up about like why are they cars? How did they build their towns? I'm like honestly. I feel like with Pixar, like if the film is good enough and like if it doesn't try to over explain itself, which Cars I don't think really ever has done, I mean, just go with it. I mean, at least that's how I've been. Because, like, I mean, if you start to go down the rabbit hole of like questioning how and why things work in a Pixar film, I mean, pretty much I'd say most all films don't even work. Like, whether it's Inside Out, whether it's Ratatouille, whether it's, Cars, Toy Story, fucking Wally. None of these films really would really hold up if you started just like really psychoanalyze like how and why any of this works or how any of this makes sense. So that was always one thing I've noticed. Like I've seen, especially on YouTube, like a lot of videos I've seen and like people talking about cars is just like they don't know, they just don't get why they are cars, and like they feel like that's like. I mean, I get it, like because I guess there are things in the first film that like it makes you wonder, like, okay, how does this work if you guys are cars? Like, how are you born and stuff like that. But I mean, I don't think that's too important. But then also, like, I feel like just like the reception, like outside of like people just being okay with the film. Like people liked it, but like I don't think that Cars ever had the following or like the support or reception that like the first Toy Story did. So like the fact that the first film was just kind of okay and then the next film was just fucking awful, like really bad. And I just watched the second film last year. I had put off looking at the film because I had heard about it and I had not seen it. And the funny thing is, I had actually seen the third film years after it come out, but I had seen the third film after a few years, but I had not seen the second film. So I went back and watched the second film. And after seeing the second film, yeah, I mean it's a bad film, and I feel like the problem with Cars 2 is it followed, and I think this trend has kind of seemed to died off a little bit. It kind of followed that formula of like a film having a very likable comedic relief character, and then the studio seeing how well they are received, and then deciding, you know what, we're gonna make that character or those characters the fucking franchise or like give them all the spotlight. And I feel like the thing with characters like Mater, because like Mater, it's essentially a Mater movie. The thing about characters like Mater is that they work in the capacity that they're in. And it seems like studios never can really comprehend that. Like, the Minions. The Minions, for me, worked as side characters. And when they started to become like the fucking like their own franchise, like they were the face of it, and they just became fucking insufferable. And I feel like with so many other, shows, and not even just like Pixar things, I feel like that's a common trope that happens of like the comedic side or supporting character becomes like the main character in the follow-up show or movie, and it just is unbearable. And really it's also because they normally flanderize the characters. Like I feel like Mater in the second film is almost like a parody of what he was in the first film, because in the first film, like, I mean, yeah, he's not the brightest character, but and he's not, the best, like as far as like being able to like race or anything like that. But he's a good friend. He actually he has he has intelligence to him that's not like traditional intelligence. Like when he teaches Lightning McQueen, the reverse driving, like and looking at the mirrors and stuff, like he is intelligent and smart in his own way, just not traditionally. And he's a wholesome character. He cares about his friends, he cares about his town, he cares about the people or the cars he knows. And that's who he was in the first film. But in the second film, he's just like this beyond fucking dumb. Just like, I mean, he's like the most dumb, generic fish out of water, doesn't know how to exist. Like the Mater in the second film, like you wonder like how he can even get down the street without getting fucking lost. Like it seems like he has no basic like awareness of reading the room, understanding how anyone else feels, or just like any type of consideration for other like cultures or anything. And I feel like in the first film, Mater did like had that. Like I don't like if you look at Mater in the first film and you look at him in the second film, like I would argue they are two different characters. Like it's almost like the SpongeBob effect of like how SpongeBob has become like a parody of like what SpongeBob was, but he's really not anywhere near what he was originally. And I feel like with Mater, that was really a big problem. So like I think between that and the story just did not make any sense. This whole fucking spy thriller James Bond plot line with Mater as this like mix up secret spy, it just didn't work. Like, I think it could have maybe worked if it was written differently. If this had been like a spin-off, like a little sideshow or like a little mini series that didn't have Mater or Lightning and it just had like completely new characters that were doing their own thing, I think this might have been like received a little bit better. But the fact that this was the follow-up to the first film, and like I said, the first film was not the most like well received. It wasn't a bad reception, but people were just kind of like, oh, that's a cool, cute little film. And then to follow up with this is just like, oh man, okay, fuck this, fuck these films, fuck these characters. And I feel like the second film just really kind of put people off for good on the Cars films, because like so many times you'll hear people say that like Cars 2 is like, even back then, like even now, but back then like Cars 2 was really a fucking black mark on Pixar because when Cars 2 came out, it's kind of crazy to think about now, but back when Cars 2 came out, Pixar was like essentially like on top of the world. Like they had like a perfect track record. Even if there were a sequel they made, it was still solid. It might not have been as good as like the first film, but it was still good. And so when this came out, not only was it a bad sequel, but it was a bad Pixar film, which at the time was kind of foreign to be like, wow, Pixar made a bad movie. That's that's different. Like that was not something that people are used to. So the fact that this was like I think I might be wrong, but I believe this was the first actual like just bad film that was like universally agreed to be bad. On top of being a follow-up to one of their weaker films, I think that combination just really damaged the Cars franchise and just kind of the like image of the Cars films. And then the third one came out, and that was, I would say, a really good film. And honestly, looking at all three films, I really think that the Cars films would be, to this day, received a lot better if the second film didn't exist and they just had Cars 1, and then you just have like a long period of no films, and then you follow up with Cars 3. Because to me, Cars 3 is a nice segue from the original Cars. Like I feel like that's a perfect continuation. Where, I mean, yeah, it would seem kind of weird considering like there is like a lot of buildup of like by the time we get to Cars 3, Lightning McQueen, he's like essentially the Dinoco of the world. Like he's the older veteran who's been around. He's not as he's not the young rookie that was the up and coming multi-talented, best than better than anyone. Like now he's the slower, older, worn down, broken down, literally broken veteran who's kind of like way past his prime. Then he has that wreck that nearly just kills him, like Doc Hudson. So like I feel like the build up to three wouldn't have been, and it's not even that good considering like the second film didn't even focus on Lightning McQueen or the main characters. Like in the second film, all the Radiator Springs characters are just kind of sidelined. Like Lightning McQueen, the fucking main character in the franchise is just sidelined as a side character. Sally, the fire truck, like all of them, they're just there like for a few minutes. Like they don't even have like a main part in the story. And so, like, all the characters that this franchise should have been built with and developed with were just kind of sidelined for the second film. And then they show up for the third film, and then they're still just kind of there. Like, Sally in the third film is just kind of there. Like, Sally should have had a bigger role. She should have been one of the like biggest characters in this franchise. Like, considering she was Lightning's love interest in the first one, they should have developed that in the second one, and then that would reach its climax in the third film. But we never got that, and I feel like also that's partly why the Cars, like as a whole, the Cars franchise is one of the weaker franchises, or I guess you would call trilogies because it's so fucking disjointed. Like the first film, I mean, personally, I think it's a good film. Most people think it's an okay film. Some think it's bad. But it's an okay film. Second one's almost universally hated. And then the third one's good, and then now they're talking about making a fourth one, which, the court's out on how that's gonna turn out. But I feel like just because the quality and the just like how the films are, like, you either have a good film, okay film, or a fucking atrociously bad film. They're all over the place, like with Pixar, at least it's generally like even Toy Story, like, a lot of people they don't like Toy Story for understandable, and obviously mostly because of how well perfectly actually Toy Story 3 wrapped up the whole franchise. And then they followed it up with 4, fucked a whole lot of that up, and then Woody and him leaving, and but then now since they're making a fifth film, they're fucking over their own ending that they fucked over from the perfect. So the reception to Toy Story, I think is kind of slowly becoming less and less generous. Like I think people are becoming less and less forgiving, and the nostalgia and the kind of soft spot people have for Toy Story, I think Pixar is kind of testing that with each new film that just kind of fucking diminishes the impact of the previous and completely ruins the characters in these films. So I feel like Toy Story is kind of heading that direction where people are just like, fuck the, fuck Toy Story, fuck these characters. I've had enough. And with with Cars, I feel like that happened a long time ago. And I feel like the thing with Cars 2 is that like with there being a fourth film coming out, they could turn the Cars franchise around because like I said, I still think that there are good films that you can make with Cars, but I feel like with just the reception of the three, it's the weaker franchise. But I think you could turn around though. And with the third one, when I watched it, I felt like, if they had just made the second film a follow up to Lightning McQueen is like an established racer who's like at the top, like he's like the best of the best, but he's still in his prime. And then you follow up with the third film. I think that the Cars franchise would be a lot better received now. If like this was a continuous progression of these characters and we saw their relationships naturally develop to their final, resolution, I think this would be a good franchise. If you developed, Flo and Ramon, Guido and Luigi, fucking I forgot Fillmore, the general, the fire truck. You could develop them and you could do a bit with them. Like, because I don't really think any of the characters, at least in the first film, are like weak characters by any means. I think they're pretty good characters. I don't think that there is really any bad characters in the first film. I think in the second film, obviously, fucking Mater is the worst character, and he, funny enough, I feel like they kind of over course corrected in a way because they went from, Mater in the first film, he's the side character, and then they made him the like pretty much like the face of the Cars films, and then they realized, okay, that was a fucking disaster. Then they made him just like not even be in most of the third one. So like he went from being a supporting character, main character, to just being like a glorified cameo. And in the fourth one, he might just show up for like a scene and then that's it. you know? At the rate that Mater's been, going and back and forth in these films. But I think that if the Cars films had been done better, I think that it would be a better place, or it'd be like more place higher with people. But I think also when I look at Cars 2, I could see like I think there is a version of what we got in Cars 2 that could have worked. Like I think if you didn't want to like continue the whole Lightning as like being a racer and racing, which is kind of weird considering this is like Cars is known for racing. It's fucking race cars. I think you could have done like a fun buddy drama, like just kind of like a fun, two person or two car, Mater and McQueen just like, on a trip or something like that, and keep it simple. Because like I feel like also that's another thing is like they just, and I think this is also kind of, I might have to kind of concede a little bit to what I said earlier. I think that they also just kind of made Cars a bit too complicated. Like they tried to make this way too more complex than it ever should have been. Like the first Cars was simple. It was about this very immature, young, brash racer who thinks he knows everything, doesn't need to, be told anything, and he finally matures and develops friends and becomes humble, and he becomes a better character for it. It's a very simple, very good story. And then you go from that to this fucking, international James Bond thriller with fucking Mater in there. It'd be like essentially having like Larry the Cable Guy as like the main character in like a James Bond film. And then having all this other shit happen on the side. Like it would just make no fucking sense, which is, why the second film was just like, man, on top of Mater just being insufferable, on top of the story making no sense, it's like, man, this is just too much shit you're putting in here. And then on top of it, you got this race going on, and then you have there's like international race, and you have like this espionage shit. Like it's too much shit going on, man. Like you could just keep this simple, and I think that they could have done that with the second film. Like if they didn't want to do racing, they could have just had like a buddy comedy with Mater and uh Lightning. Like I think that would have been cool. But also, going back to the third film and seeing how that film ended. I think that at this point, like, I mean, Pixar, they're gonna be full force into the whole sequel territory just because their recent films have not done too well. So whether we like it or not, we are gonna be getting, Incredibles 3, Inside Out 3, Ratatouille 2, God forbid, at some point. And we're gonna get Cars 4. I think actually it has been confirmed we are getting Cars 4. And so kind of looking at like what Cars 4 could be, after like kind of looking at what the previous films have been and what they could have been, I think a good place for Cars 4 to be at is just to be, I don't know, like, because at the same time I would like for them to just move on from Lightning at this point because I feel like they have just wrapped his story up. Like I don't think there is anything you can do with Lightning as much anymore because like they've established at the end of the third film that he's like, you know what, I can't keep up anymore. I'm older. It's time for the younger cars to take over and and take the reins and and be the new generation of racers and he became more of a trainer role. And I feel like honestly, Lightning, his story is just kind of wrapped up, and I forgot her name, the yellow. Yeah, I think she was yellow. The young character that like pretty much like became his protege. Um, I feel like it would be good to focus on her at this point and just kind of. I mean, I know that like the thing with sequels is like they want to keep all the original characters, but honestly, at this point, I feel like there isn't really much for the original cast to do because the original cast of Radiator Springs, Fillmore, Flo, all of them, they were all connected to Lightning. Like that was their connection to the films. And then, Mater was connected to Lightning. And so like if Lightning is really kind of phased out, then by proxy, all of them are kind of phased out. Like they don't really like none of them really have much to do. Like Sally and all them, like they really don't got much to do in a Cars 4 if Lightning isn't going to be the main character, which he's not. I don't see how he could be. I mean, they're going to try to have him in there just because he is the most iconic character in the Cars franchise. But I feel like honestly, just having like Lightning and Mater and them just be like supporting characters, have the new girl take over and really just start new. Like I feel like Cars 4 could be in a way like a nice reset for Cars cuz I mean honestly, I don't think anyone's going to be upset or heartbroken if they do like a soft reboot of Cars and, start new cuz like I said, Cars as a trilogy has had a fucking hit or miss record. So I think starting new and learning from what didn't work, what did work, what made the first film good, what made the third film good, I think that would be good. I think that they might actually be able to make a good film because, like, I still think that the Cars franchise, as much as people trash it and don't like it, and it is like one of their weaker films, I still think there is potential in it. Like, I think that you can make a good story, and they did make a good story in the first one. I even say the third one, like, even people that saw the second film and they saw the third film, they were like, you know what, this film it's actually good. I've not really seen anyone who has said that the third film is really bad compared to the second film, or like as bad like as like the second film. They're always like compared to the second film, this is actually fucking good. But I think it's a good film, and a lot of people seem to agree with that. So like it does show that like people do like Cars when it's done well. It's just the problem is it's been a very hit or miss track record of getting it better more often than getting it worse, which at this point they're two for one, but that one was a fucking pretty big one, which kind of negates the two at this point. So a four film kind of would be like a make or break as to if people would really want to continue looking at, or even interested in, another Cars like Cars 5 or Cars 6. But we'll have to see though. We'll have to see what Pixar does with a fourth Cars film. But I think just overall looking back, at least for me, because I feel like I'm a bit more biased, and I'm not as harsh, nowhere near as harsh as most people are with the Cars films. I personally think looking back on all of the Cars films we've gotten so far, I think that the Cars franchise is pretty solid. I mean, yeah, the second film pretty rough. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. But it has a good first film, has a good second film, and really, even though the second film isn't good and Mater is fucking just atrociously bad and flanderized, I still think even despite that, even though it has the convoluted, James Bond plot line and all that shit going for it, I still think it's not like the worst. I think it's just it especially for back then, it was definitely bad for Pixar standards then, and it's still not good now. But I think with all of the current Pixar films we've gotten, which have been okay to bad to just all right to just very controversial, I feel like this film has not, it doesn't have the same, I think, kind of stigma it did back when it first came out. I think that there has been kind of a, I don't know, kind of a re-examining of like, well, maybe Cars 2 isn't as bad. I don't think you're gonna. I don't think anyone's ever gonna like have a 180 of like thinking this film was ever like a really good film. But I think people might think that, maybe I was a bit too harsh on you. Maybe, little did we know what was gonna come in the years following. So I think people might have kind of softened their take on Cars 2. But for me overall, I think it's a good franchise. Like I still go back and watch the first one. The music's solid. The third one's a good film, and like Toy Story, I think that the third film wraps up Lightning McQueen and the story of Cars pretty well. Like I think Cars, honestly, all things considered, ended on a good note. Like I think the way it ended was a pretty wholesome ending with Lightning becoming the mature, pretty much like the Doc Hudson, the mature older veteran who, is now like taking the mantle of training the younger generation. Like he's become Doc Hudson now. And I think that's a good way to end it. Like I feel like that's a natural progression and a natural end of an arc for someone like Lightning McQueen from where we saw him in the first film and we saw him in the third film. So really I think it wrapped up good. And unfortunately, we're going to be in a Toy Story situation where now they're going to pretty much rip that apart and do something else and probably Flanderize Lightning McQueen and whoever else they bring back, like they did, Mater. Well, not even just Mater, just like that thing they do now and just sequels where they just completely fuck the characters and all the development they've had just goes out the window and they do a reset so they can have a recycled story since there's nothing really new you can do with these characters since their arcs are done. But nonetheless, we'll have to kind of hope for the best on that one. But with that said, I think I'm gonna call it a day here. Let me know what you think. If you are a fan of the Cars films, if you don't like them, if you think that they should continue. But either way, I'm curious to know what you think about them. And with that said, I think I'm gonna call it a day here, and I'll see you good people later.